Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. The biggest expense most people face is their housing costs, and for most people, a big financial win is becoming mortgage-free. Overwhelmingly, the most popular mortgage term length in America is the 30-year mortgage, with 70% of all mortgages classified as this type. And according to the Census Bureau, about 40% of adults own their home outright. That is to say, they don't have a mortgage. For most Americans, a mortgage is the biggest financial obligation they will ever face. And with a loan spanning 30 years, the interest charges can end up being hundreds of thousands of dollars. So those interest payments can end up being really enormous. Let's consider what a typical 30-year mortgage might look like. Currently, interest rates are sitting higher than they have been, at least from recent history, and that is hovering around 7% or so. If you were to have a $300,000 30-year mortgage at a 7% interest rate, simply looking at the principal and interest, the monthly payment would be just shy of $2,000 a month. And over those 30 years, the total cost of this loan would be $718,000, with over $400,000 of this payment going to interest alone. Even if we were to consider what a 30-year mortgage looked like at more modest interest rates. Say a $300,000 30-year mortgage at a 4% interest rate. Now that monthly payment is closer to $1,400 a month, and over the total lifetime of the loan would cost about $515,000, with $215,000 going directly to interest. Interest rates are a huge determining factor when it comes to figuring out how much of a monthly payment you can afford and overall what type of home you can afford. That's why we see so many headlines nowadays questioning home affordability, because not only are home prices at record highs, but so too are interest rates, at least from a recent historical standpoint. The burden of a mortgage can weigh heavily. Perhaps from an emotional standpoint, perhaps there's a stress of having such a large outstanding debt, and there can be great peace of mind that comes with owning your home outright. From a financial standpoint, a mortgage generally eats up a pretty significant portion of an individual's budget, so getting that paid off can give you a lot of flexibility when it comes to your income. And I know when interest rates were at low levels, in that 2 to 3% range, you often have this debate of whether paying off a mortgage early is really worth it. At least from a financial standpoint. It can be hard to generate an argument based on an emotional feeling. But I think in today's environment, a higher interest rate environment, the idea of ridding yourself of this higher interest debt at a more accelerated pace can be very appealing. Now, what's the best way to go about paying off your mortgage early? The 10-15 rule was recently made popular through social media. It's the idea that if you were to take 10% of your monthly mortgage payment and pay that additional amount each week, you would be able to pay off your 30-year mortgage in about roughly half the time, in about 15 years. So if you had a monthly mortgage payment that was $3,000, 10% of that would be $300. So you would pay an additional $300 every single week, and that would help you to pay off this 30-year mortgage in about 15 years' time. Now, I love this concept, especially for the sake of simplicity, but it is worth pointing out here, specifically since this is a numbers-oriented crowd, that if you run this example or do this method, it doesn't work out to be exactly a 15-year payoff. For example, let's look at our $30,000 30-year mortgage at a 7% interest rate. Following this 10% would result in you paying off your mortgage in just 13 years and 7 months. On the other hand, if you had a $300,000 30-year mortgage at a 4% interest rate, following this 10% would result in you paying off your mortgage in 16 years and 9 months. So the big takeaway here is that as interest rates fluctuate, it will influence this payment schedule, but it is a good general guideline, and paying off your mortgage early can result in significant interest savings. Paying off this $300,000 30-year mortgage at a 7% interest rate following this strategy results in an interest savings of $253,000. And using this strategy on the 4% mortgage results in an interest savings of about $104,000. Naturally, the greater the interest rate on the mortgage, the greater the interest savings by paying it off early. Again, I really like this rule for its simplicity. It's pretty easy to figure out what 10% of your mortgage payment is. However, it's not necessarily easy to come up with an additional 10% every single week. But if this is something you can swing financially, I think this is a great rule to follow. It definitely helps you pay off that home early. Keep in mind, you don't actually have to submit this payment on a weekly basis. You could set it to go up every single month or so. Another common tactic to paying off your mortgage early is a bi-weekly schedule, where you take your monthly mortgage, cut it in half, and make a payment every 2 weeks rather than on a more traditional monthly basis. For instance, in our example of a $3,000 monthly mortgage payment, you would simply pay $1,500 every 2 weeks. Ultimately, if you follow this payment schedule, you end up making an additional monthly payment every single year. And that's simply because of how the calendar works. If you follow the traditional schedule, doing one payment per month, you make 12 payments over the course of a year. However, if you use a bi-weekly schedule, there are 52 weeks in a given year. And if you're making a half payment every other week, so 26 payments are being made, you end up making 13 full payments throughout the course of the year. So the equivalent of an additional 1 month's worth of payments. Now, while a single additional monthly payment every single year might not seem like much at first, if you do that throughout the entire course of the loan, you can actually shorten the life of your loan by anywhere from 4 to 6 years. The exact amount of time saved depends on the interest rate, the loan amount, and how consistently the biweekly payments are made. If we stick with our previous example of a $300,000 30-year mortgage, comparing it at a 7% interest rate and a 4% interest rate, following this biweekly payment schedule, the loan at a 7% interest rate would be paid off roughly 6 years early, whereas the loan at a 4% interest rate would be paid off roughly 4 years early. Again, we see this inverse relationship, where a loan sitting at a higher interest rate experiences a greater benefit from an accelerated repayment schedule. The dollar a month plan is a strategy that should be feasible for a lot of people. It's that you simply increase the amount that you pay towards your mortgage by $1 each month. In our previous example, with the $300,000 mortgage sitting at 7%, the monthly payment was near $2,000 a month. At the interest rate of 4%, that monthly mortgage payment was near $1,600. So what you would do in either of these scenarios is increase your monthly payment amount by $1 every single month until that loan was paid off. And at first you might be thinking $1, that's not really that big of a deal over time. But in each of these situations, you end up shaving off a little bit over 4 years. You pay off that 30-year loan in about 25 years' time. And that's pretty impressive from really small $1 increments. What if you could swing $5 a month more? Looking at this $300,000 mortgage on a 30-year loan, comparing a 7% interest rate and a 4% interest rate, you would shave off nearly 11 and a half years off these loans. Again, that is very powerful for very small dollar amounts. I love finding really powerful uses for small dollar amounts, and I think this is one of the best examples of that. And make no mistake about it, over time, those $5 increments would add up, because 10 years into your mortgage, at exactly that 10-year mark, that would be an additional $600 going towards your mortgage. So yes, absolutely, these amounts do add up. But if you buy a home at the beginning of your career and your income grows slowly over time, this approach could be very manageable and it could result in you becoming mortgage-free substantially sooner. A key point is to remember to inform your lender that your extra payments should be applied to the principal, not interest. Otherwise, your lender might simply apply these additional payments towards future scheduled monthly payments, and that's not going to save you any money. Now, should you pay off your mortgage early? That depends on your perspective and your ability to do so. It's really hard to make an argument against the psychological benefits of being debt-free and being mortgage-free. Some people really want to be debt-free, and if that's what makes you feel best, that's the best choice for you. End of story. And when it comes to finances, sometimes the best decision is the one that brings you the greatest peace of mind, even if mathematically it isn't the best decision. Often you'll hear the argument that if you pay off your mortgage early, you'll lose that tax deduction on the interest paid on your mortgage, which is true. Or the other big argument you hear is that if your interest rate on your mortgage is sitting at a low rate, say 4% or less, which actually accounts for 62% of all mortgages, you can make the case that if this money was otherwise invested elsewhere, you'd be able to capture a greater return. For instance, if you invested it in the stock market, maybe you could capture a return of 7 or 8%. Unfortunately, if you get a mortgage at today's current rates, somewhere around 7%, it's hard to make the argument that you could invest elsewhere and guarantee yourself that type of return. It's hard to find a guaranteed 8, 9, or 10+% in the marketplace. Yes, the stock market has an average long-term rate of return that hovers around 7 or 8% once inflation adjusted, but it's not guaranteed. Ultimately, if you want to pay off your home early, that's an individual choice. But if it's something you want to do, there are some sneaky ways you can do it, and even some of them are fairly painless. Do you have a mortgage, and is it something you're planning on paying off early? Or have you already paid off your home? Leave your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.